Greetings to everyone. Today I want to talk about a topic I have already touched on in several videos about the dimensions of consciousness, but this time I'd like to go into more detail on certain aspects. With each passing time, each month, each year, more and more information in these areas will be revealed to us because we are now able to perceive and pick up on these ranges in order to distinguish and change them. Why is the topic of these dimensions becoming relevant and changing at all? With a shift in the frequency of the entire planet, the overall configuration of the collective field is changing. In other words, the laws by which we used to live, from the perspective of energy, are becoming impossible in certain dimensions. That is why many people have experienced processes of completion, reset, loss, and so on. Previously, if we recall, probably from the 60s up until the 90s, more or less people lived within the same range. In other words, there were basically no changes during that time. Then a transition occurred, and after that, every 10 years there was a shift of a certain layer within the same dimension. That is our dimensions, the ones that are currently relevant in this period of time. The third, fourth, and fifth dimensions are divided into layers. Each layer is responsible for certain systems of perception, systems of reactions, actions, manifestations, and types of thinking in a person. In other words, within the range of a single layer, a person can only act in certain specific ways. In other cases, they won't be able to act differently because there are certain blockages in place. Now we will analyze in more detail and more deeply what exactly I am talking about. If we take the system of the third range, yes, the third type of thinking, the 3D field, let's call it that, then in this system, people are maximally equipped with various types of programs, limitation programs, shame programs, pain programs, fear programs, which are the most effective in the 3D field programs of the feeling of almost there, just a little more, I'll endure a bit longer, and it's almost here, almost just about. That is, in this particular dimension, people grew and evolved through a linear type of development, meaning they simply couldn't move or progress in any other way because their consciousness of people who are in that density cannot broaden and expand or grow in any other way at all. And the method of development was through the personality system, through its involvement in programs. In this way, a person became aware, accumulated energy, and development occurred along with a shift in the vector of attention, which in turn led to a change in the frequency range. Then the level of the 4D dimension appeared. It began to emerge around the 2000s, when we started to feel it, not everyone though. A certain part of the planet was maximally and actively engaged. The task of this group was to awaken the rest. That is, an active awakening began through books, through interaction, through topics of personal growth, and so on. There were many aspects of engagement so that people would start to feel through the system of sensing, not thinking. In other words, the 3D dimension, let's say its foundation, its base, is rooted in thinking. The 4D dimension, its main foundation is sensing. I feel in the 5D dimension, this is the system where your sensory activity has been activated. You are attuned to your higher vibrational being and higher self, and you are in active contact with your soul. So this is where all the differences will be on perception versus another perception. In the previous video about the energies of May, I talked about how there is currently a certain densification of the layers happening. That is, the boundaries that used to be blurred are now becoming more defined. In other words, how much you have been able to expand your point of perception, shift your focus of attention, and direct it into the flow of activity. It is precisely from this moment that you find yourself in one dimension or another. What exactly is vibrational attunement? And in what ways does vibration actually change over time? Vibration is essentially what you feel most of the time, regardless of the situations or circumstances around you. And in general, it is what surrounds you in your environment. If your dominant frequency of feeling is mostly sorrowful, longing, something hurts, or you are worried about something, then accordingly you are mainly in the 3D dimension. There is nothing bad or shameful about this, and so on. Because, due to this trend of spiritual development, someone might immediately start placing themselves into certain systems. No. In the same way, if a person is developing and somehow comprehends all the laws, that does not at all make them a person who is in the 5D dimension. These are completely different aspects. There are people whose system of love is so dominant and they are now of advanced age, but their hearts are so open to love. In other words, they know nothing about any transitions, yet their dominant frequency allows them to move into those dimensions where their life unfolds based on their perception of the world, you see. Previously, in three-dimensionality, systems such as money and the physical body were used to awaken the spirit. That is, a person would be given a sequence of developmental events through the financial system or the lack of finances. In such cases, a person had to expand their range of fears, their range of limitations, take action, venture into the unknown, change, try new things, and also deal with the amount of money. In other words, they were given, let's say, opportunities. People would pursue these opportunities, but under financial pressure, many couldn't withstand the stress. And some lost money, some ended up in unpleasant situations, some damaged their health. It was a varied system. So, both of these were systems of development through the body. There could be illnesses, injuries, weight loss, and so on. In other words, a person's development happened through these experiences. When we shifted the dimension, that is, when a person is in the third dimension, they don't see a way out. They are completely immersed in the system of psychological influence, either of the situation on themselves or themselves on the situation. That is, he solves the situation. In the fourth dimension, the reaction is different. We identify the type of energy that is affecting us and then emit from ourselves the energy that the space requires. For example, if you need to gain the energy of love, but you are experiencing a situation of being devalued in this aspect, you need to identify the root. I love myself. Yes, to find this dominant system within yourself. This path is not easy. It sounds simple in words, yes, but in terms of feeling, it's somewhat different. This feeling needs to be revived from within, and it cannot be revived by external factors. It is an internal system that is born from the heart. When we experience gratitude, not just empty words, but true, sincere, and heartfelt gratitude toward the space and the world for everything we have. When we are dominated by gratitude, when it makes up almost 90%, you are operating within the system of the fourth dimension. Here, you already define your reality based on your feelings. I feel that this person is not right for me. I feel that this activity inspires me. And even if it doesn't pay as much money as I want, I know that I needed to come here. I feel, or in other words, here there is already active work with impulses. That is, at this point, there is a complete response to impulses. In three-dimensionality, we very rarely respond to impulses, and there is a long gap between the impulse and our reaction. So three-dimensionality is a length of time between an idea, a desire, an impulse, and the moment you actually make it happen. Because this energetic blockage is due to certain programs, which is contained in the personality module and serves as a system of restraint, but at the same time also of development. For some life, we look at it from the soul's perspective. If we consider all these questions, for some this is perfectly fine. And in general, a person, a soul, came specifically to have this kind of experience. No other experiences, only this one. This is the very best experience for the soul. But at the present time, most people are still going through the awakening system, and many suffer when they transition into the fourth dimension because their clairsentience opens up. This is when you feel the entire space as if, as if it's like a burn of some sort. In other words, you feel the pain of other people. This isn't even about empathy. It's much more and much deeper than that. You feel the vibration of places, objects, people, and thoughts. In other words, here there is a full activation of the sensory foundation because the spiritual heart is opening up. It is from this moment that true spiritual growth and connection with the spirit begin. The fourth dimension is a kind of platform that prepares you to connect with your higher essence. And in order to connect, yes, for this connection to happen for you, the system of sensing is open. Within this system of sensing, the programs of the old module and personality are reset. That is, there is a complete synchronization and tuning of the energy of the personality, the system, and the soul. Because we need the energy of the personality to realize the energy of the soul. When this whole system has taken place, when we have connected, yes, when the awakening of our spirit has occurred, how can you tell that you are in the fourth dimension? You will no longer be able to betray yourself. You will definitely no longer act from the state of a victim or a savior. And even if you have to work at a job that doesn't really bring you joy, let's put it that way, but you have a higher purpose, for example, providing for your family, you don't see this job as a punishment from above, but as something that gives you the opportunity to live your life in this particular way right now. Do you understand? That is, before your circumstances change, before the illusion you see changes, you will start to experience those very processes differently. You will see your mother not as a strict dictator imposing her own rules, but rather as a person who genuinely worries about her beloved child and is deeply afraid that they might perhaps make the very same mistakes she herself once did. For example, yes. Or you will see your partner not as a loser who can't find a decent job, but simply as a soul whom you love. It is from these moments that your spiritual awakening begins. These very aspects start to come into play. At this point, there is no longer the issue of temptations, because by this moment you will have already gone through all of them. And in the fourth dimension, with the consciousness of the fourth dimension, a person will already be able to distinguish where there is temptation, where there is distortion, where there is no truth, where there is no truth, where there is emptiness. There will no longer be such empty blossoming. Let's call it that. The most interesting thing is the fifth dimension. For me, it's interesting because it's something new, inspiring, and different. The fifth dimension, I'm sure that many of you have experienced similar feelings before, but I will describe them now for those people for whom this is just beginning. We never enter a dimension within a single year. For example, we start hearing about the transition, and suddenly here we all are in the transition. That's it, we're in the fourth dimension, or we're in the third, or somewhere else. No, often this process takes a certain number of years. For example, the fifth dimension is characterized by the fact that people see other dimensions. That is, they see themselves in other lives in the present moment. And these are often more favorable elements because we are built in such a way that if our system is dominated by the waves of love and gratitude, that's a fairly high frequency that allows us to remain there. So how do you dominate these frequencies? Don't hold on to anger and resentment toward the whole world as if the world owes you something. No one owes anyone anything at all. And if you want something, you just go and do it. That's it. This rule always works. You remove the importance and significance from all the processes that are laid out in your life. Next, regarding the fifth dimension, and a person sees these ideal essences, then they are shown the steps that will lead them to those ideal essences. So why is this necessary? Well, the soul receives the required amount of energy much faster. In other words, development happens more quickly. Evolution occurs faster than consciousness. Consciousness changes its perception and, well, it's similar to a game of chess. A person knows many moves ahead what they need to do. So they will be in the right place, not by accident. If in four-dimensionality, luck is already activated, what we call being in the right place at the right time, when coincidence is not really a coincidence and so on, then here consciousness is able to precisely determine the exact point where it needs to be, and when and where and with whom. At this level, it will be difficult to deceive such a person because they will be able to see ahead. Even if you don't intend to deceive anyone, consciousness will already be able to see in advance the various possible outcomes of events. How does all of this begin? For me, it started happening probably since 2019. At least that's what I can recall for sure right now. Previously, I wasn't familiar with this information, and I used to perceive it as imagination. Later on, I realized that imagination, in principle, doesn't actually exist. Because when you imagine something, the image grows on its own. You can focus your attention on an object like an elephant. Yes, just concentrate on it. But over time, you'll start to see the color of the elephant. And maybe it won't even be gray, but brown. Something else and something else around the elephant, and more things appear. Although, you could argue about this a lot, but we won't get into that now. We won't delve into this aspect. It's not necessary for us at the moment. And over time, I realized that what I was being shown were these dimensions. That is, at that point in my life, I was seeing dimensions of consciousness where I was, even though I was actively aware that I was seeing the future, I didn't understand how I was seeing it or how it was happening. Now, however, I can explain it. because now a more global system is at work. Now I'm being shown how this happens on a global scale. Yes. In other words, where do I need to end up? Why do I have to be at this particular point? What will happen if I find myself at this point and in situations where I might have been scared before and wouldn't have acted or wouldn't have communicated with that person now, looking at this sort of map, something clicks, right? And we immediately start making decisions that match the vibration of that even. So when we are in the consciousness of the fifth dimension, a person's sensory perception is activated at 95%. That is, a person clearly feels, clearly sees, clearly understands, teleports, and communicates at the very least with their higher self, teachers, and angels. If the range allows, they also communicate as a contactee with other civilizations. In other words, in the fifth dimension, this function already becomes like that of an ordinary person. I mean, how could it be otherwise? So there are no longer any limitations where only you and no one else live in this world. The limitations remain in the third dimension along with fears, pains, and resentment. This is no longer in the top 5. There you become aware of what the microcosm and macrocosm are, what it means for our consciousness to go beyond the planet, how it connects with the consciousness of the planet, how all of this works. You see, the energy there is on a completely different scale. And it turns out that now many people can see themselves simultaneously in other realms. And they can perceive these other realms. You need to understand that these are the points where you are meant to be. Our next step is to figure out what dimension is being shown to you, because for a long time I would just observe these dimensions. I would just look at them, and at the time I didn't fully realize why I was seeing all these processes. Well, I see and I see, it was fine, and that was enough. Everything and everyone, basically, period. Later on, I started to receive information that I needed to record these dimensions. Then, to determine the range of vibrations of that dimension, in other words, what exactly is being transmitted, what kind of energy is being transmitted. Next, you need to find the steps. That is, how I arrived at that dimension, and in these reverse steps find the entry point into that dimension, because we are higher system, our spiritual self, it leads us, it already knows everything. In other words, it knows the map of the world. Let's put it that way. And you live within the map in a country, right? And it knows where the borders you need are, where those narrow streets are, where you need to go around, where you need to, in other words, it's a kind of GPS system that has everything you need. And when you are already anchored in the fifth dimension, you see these entry points, you have no fear, because the frequency of fear does not correspond to the fifth dimension. That is, it is the frequency of fear between 3 and 4. So that's where it gets burned away, let's put it that way. Between the fourth and fifth dimensions, there may still be old patterns that will now come up as certain tests or lessons to check your reactions. Yes, meaning whether you still react in the old way or already in the new way. The system will not let you through these layers if you are not vibrating accordingly. Trust is not just about faith. That is, in the fourth dimension, you are already expanding the range of faith and trust, right? But if you still have some kind of not quite enough, you won't make it to the point of true faith. True faith comes when your claircognizance opens up, when you live your life guided by your own knowledge, when you no longer need to repeat after someone or study something, when you unlock your inner knowing, then you move into this fifth dimension. And there is simply a sense of feeling that is, I feel that it is so, I see, I know, I understand, I sense, I even see how it happens, and that's it, and I do it, how it all comes together. Ah, so this is reality. It truly exists. Now this is opening up to people, and now it's clear how it works. Up until this point, it was probably more of a verbal concept, but now these are practical activations up until the June solar solstice. The sun, the solstice, not the equinox, the solstice, which will be in the 20s of the month, is when these layers become denser and you are clearly fixed in the dimension where you will be. Based on this, your evolution and vibration will take place. That's why it's extremely important not to miss May, but to start taking action. It is extremely important in June to find inner harmony and peace. These are the frequencies that will synchronize you with the new vibrations of the planet, and among other things, will allow you to be in those places that I'll call them favorable for living. Honestly, undoubtedly, the world has already split and will continue to split. And we will see this even more clearly when in the same place, in the same city, people will be living completely different lives. Some will truly enjoy themselves, while others will not. All of this will depend solely on your perception, your frequency, your vibration. Well, I think that was interesting. I'm really quite interested. Leave your feedback, share your opinion, though you feel the same way, or maybe you feel differently. See you next time.